Nice glasses, by the way.
I was going to comment. You've got good taste.
So I got new glasses. Maybe you can tell me what you think as somebody who clearly
Okay.
likes
Yeah.
wireframe glasses.
Wireframe
I
round metallic.
I think that this makes me look maybe like more of my age or older.
They both give like I mean, I chose my glasses. They give approachable yet academic. And I mean, I think we're both
Okay.
in that kind of profession, I guess. And
Or at least
yours
try to be, yeah.
yeah, yours similar like I think either way, it's a similar vibe. Maybe this one's more in the academic direction.
Maybe when
Yeah.
I'm trying to be taken more seriously,
Yeah,
we'll go
maybe.
with this.
They both look
And
great.
then when I'm
I
just
do have a
playing
bias for these.
wireframes. Okay, we'll do the wireframes for this podcast then. Hello and welcome to the GD Politics Podcast. I'm Galen Drew. Low-key, the whole political scene is such an L right now. Everyone's either gaslighting, rage farming, or displaying NPC behavior. American politics is just vibe check after vibe check, but it's mostly giving flop era with zero accountability. If you're confused as to why me, a millennial podcaster, is speaking like a Gen Z TikToker, it's because today we're going to talk about how the internet shapes our language, and in doing so, shapes our culture and politics. Also, yes, in case you were wondering, ChatGPT wrote that. Today, the spread of ideas happens in large part on social media. And on social media, what gets promoted or demoted, or even what words we're allowed to use, is largely determined by algorithms. This has created a new dynamic where algorithms are increasingly influencing how we communicate. A simple example might be the emergence of the word unalive because social media platforms ban content about suicide. But it goes well beyond that. This is the argument Adam Alexic lays out in his new book, AlgoSpeak: How Social Media is Transforming the Future of Language. Adam is a linguist and known online as Etymology Nerd. Adam, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, so excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. So I'm going to make you tie all of this into politics eventually, but it's the middle of the summer.
It'll
Let's
happen.
live
All
a
language
little.
is political. We got this.
Well, there you go. Okay. I was going to say let's live a little and not talk about politics for a second, but if all language is political, then by default, we are talking about politics. So how does AlgoSpeak work in a nutshell?
Yeah, so I opened with that example of unalive, the fact that the word kill is suppressed on TikTok and creators find ways to reroute around that algorithmic censorship. But I think algorithms are so much more than that. They're an infrastructure underlying how we communicate. And the story of language is a story of how we use tools to communicate, and each of those tools is going to uniquely affect language. Every once in a while, there's like these big inflection points that change the medium of what we're saying, and then as a result, language also changes. The internet emerged, and that allowed for the written replication of informal speech. When books and the printing press emerged, that also changed how we popularize certain language, vernacular printing, all of that. Now algorithms are a new infrastructure underlying language. They change where words come from, how words spread, and how quickly words get there.
We started with an example of censorship, right? The platforms preventing people from talking about killing themselves or suicide, not to get really dark at the start of this. But there's also something else going on with the algorithms that's really powerful, which is promoting or demoting certain ideas or language or ways of communicating, which is really driving this algo speak that you talk about. Is it seeking virality or is it censorship?
You have to start with what these platforms are doing. And these platforms are trying to get your attention so that they can sell you as many products as possible and commodify your data. And it all relies on attention. So they bake in attention incentives into their infrastructure. Now, I, as a creator, I have to think about metrics like retention, how long people stay watching my video. I have to think about likes, shares, comments, all that. That is me identifying with the platform's metrics in order to be able to push my message further. But in doing so, I'm grabbing your attention. So we also see language evolving around what grabs attention as well. There's innate things that fascinate us. We're fascinated with younger people's slang, the way you open this podcast with that. When we think about words like riz or skibbity, those are culturally, they are fascinating to us. We are collectively captivated by the idea that younger people are talking differently than we are. And so that gets remixed online into cringe comedy, and circularly becomes more of a thing. And this happens because when something starts trending in the algorithm, creators pay attention to that. They see, oh, this is trending, and I, as a creator, need to hop onto trends in order to stay relevant, in order for my content to be seen. And so they see something is trending, they capitalize on that trend, and they circularly push those words further, performing them further into virality. So we have this sort of engagement treadmill of words being pushed more simply because they already are trending, and we're trying to push them further.
You mentioned Riz and Skibbity, which folks may be familiar with, but Riz means charisma and Skibbity means nothing, from what I understand after reading your
you're
book.
pretty versed, yeah.
Let's like indulge a little bit here. What are some other words that have become popularized online that either mean something or nothing? And by the way, this is an independent enterprise, so you can be as profane as you like.
There's segs for sex. There's all kinds of emoji substitutions. We've all been using the eggplant to mean penis, but it's exactly what is happening online even more now. The ninja emoji standing in for the N-word. All of that is algo speak. And it's like literally what linguists call a productive force, something that causes more language change, because these algorithms are forcing us to come up with new ways to articulate ourselves. And that means finding new words. And so literally they're forming more language faster. Words that mean nothing, there's a few of those. The way people, use sigma as an interjection, what the sigma doesn't really mean anything there. It's just a funny thing to say. But sigma also could have the meaning of an independent man in the manosphere. Now we see like words like diluting from the manosphere into everyday middle schooler vocabulary, which is also another thing that's interesting to me about online language and how algorithms spread ideas across different communities, across different filter bubbles and echo chambers, that we have these very niche, isolated communities exporting their ideas to the mainstream.
In your book, you say that experts use almost epidemiological tools to track the spread of ideas. What does the spread of an idea on the internet look like today?
Right. The standard model of memetics, which is flawed. It's a metaphor. It doesn't work perfectly, but you can kind of think of it like a virus. You think about how a word can infect a host, and then that person will transmit that to another person, and then it spreads throughout the population that way. And we see this terminology when we talk about social media going viral, right? Stuff like that. It's how social trends diffuse among in-groups and out-groups. You feel cool when you're part of a trend, and you adopt that because of your perception of what's happening. And then once the trend dies out, once the virus moves through the population, once your grandmother starts saying the word skibbity, it's no longer cool. It might die out. But there's this perception of prestige, of in-group. Words tend to follow what is seen as funny or what is cool. There's a lot of words, for example, coming from African-American English, particularly the ballroom slang in New York City in the 1980s. That's slay, serve, queen, cooked, ate, bet, yas. It's giving. All of those come from that queer Black Latino space in New York City. And yet, because they're perceived as cool by adjacent groups, it starts with that space, and then it starts being used by like maybe white gay men, and then it starts being used by the straight white girl friends of gay men. And there's a natural way social ideas diffuse. That's always been a thing. The word cool itself comes from African American English, ironically borrowed because it was perceived as cool. But that took like 40 years to hit the mainstream. All these words got here a lot, faster once they were popularized on TikTok, because there's also context collapse. There's the idea that you don't know where words are coming from, and it allows words to move faster without a regulating mechanism where somebody couldn't like look at you and say, maybe that word's not meant for you. So these words move a little bit faster. They escape the original filter bubbles because these boundaries are porous, and the algorithm will expose people to ideas that they might not have an idea about before, but it'll push things and trends to the mainstream, partially out of collective fascination, partially out of what's funny and cool.
So this is why when I like hang out with my young cousins, they're saying Yas Queen in the same exact way that the drag queens on Paris is Burning are saying it.
Right. They have no idea, usually. Like, I also, same with like Sigma. When a middle schooler says, what the Sigma, I had an opportunity last month to interview a bunch of middle schoolers. They don't know where it comes from. They just think, oh, this is a funny word. I say this because my friend Jaden says it. And it's just a way for them to connect with one another. They lose context completely. They don't know about the ballroom scene. They don't know about incels, thankfully. So maybe it's not as harmful as it could be, but also potentially maybe those ideas are filtering through, and you can sort of follow the conduits of how culture is changing by following where words are coming from.
Okay, well, if they don't know about incels, let's tell them. You track how incel language, which is involuntary celibates, which is men who say that they can't have sex because they're too unattractive, formed a community online, developed a whole set of language around their community that then bled throughout the rest of internet culture and to the middle schoolers that you're talking about who heard the word Sigma, like you were saying, from Jaden. How did this exactly work? And for folks who aren't initiated, what kind of language that we use today comes from the incel community?
There's a lot of things going on here. I'll throw out just a few words. And if you're not young, you might not know some of them.
What counts as young, by the way?
I don't know.
Ask as a millennial.
You might be on
to
the boundary here.
Okay.
Well, I'm certainly in politics spaces. You'll hear the suffix "pilled," like convinced into a lifestyle. If I like eating burritos, I'm burrito pilled, and that comes out of red pilled and blue pilled. But it was only popularized as a productive suffix after it was bracketed off of those words and formed black pilled, which means convinced into incel ideology. And then they start appending it to other meme language, and so it only spreads beyond red pilled and blue pilled as just a phrase because of the incel influence. There's maxing.
Wait, hold on. So first, to be clear, incels developed the idea of black pilled, which is you're in the incel community.
You have the matrix. You have the red pill and the blue pill, and that's applied to politics. You can become red pilled if you become Republican, or blue pilled if you become a Democrat. And then black pilled is accepting this philosophy they have. It's called the black pill, or lookism. It's this idea about physical attractiveness being the determiner of your sexual market value. They have a lot of like frameworks and hierarchies built up around that kind of stuff.
Okay. Some of the other words.
Right. So, okay, pilled is just convinced into a lifestyle. Maxing is maximizing something. So if I really like eating burritos, I can be burrito maxing. Sigma, we see words like Chad, and we like that was kind of in the 4chan space, but it's popularized through this sort of language. Cell as a suffix. I got a meme when I started researching this, and I use this example in the book. I got a meme about it's so hard being a walk-pilled cardio maxer in a car cell gas-cucked state like Arizona. And that might sound like nonsensical. It just means like it's hard walking if you if you live in Arizona. But that's an example of how this might be used. This incel language might be used in a different context. Okay, so we have that example. Why are these words getting here? Where are they coming from? You have to start with the fact that the incel community is highly productive in coming up with new words. First, the space started incubating on 4chan, although it later moved off of that. But 4chan itself is, because everybody's anonymous, there's a need to demonstrate a performative proficiency in shared slang and come up with new slang words. So 4chan already is a highly productive space. There's a common aphorism that all internet culture is downstream of 4chan. I think, it's downstream of 4chan or black culture. I think that's pretty much true. But okay, so 4chan is highly productive at coming up with new words. Incels later moved to other forums, but they still have this language. They still have they fused with the ideas of the manosphere and the alt-right in 4chan. And they're this violent misogynistic group that has all these, built up ideas. And in the incel space, there's layers of how in the group you are. Within the circle, it's cult-like. There's a group of true cells who use language like you can't even understand what they're saying. They have so many built up, very negative language. They'll call women foids, dumpsters, roasties. They'll have all these Asian classifications for rice cells and curry cells, and that's the idea that racial hierarchies exist in sexual market. It's a very strange dynamic they have and the philosophy, but they have all that language which is not compelling to the mainstream. Some of their ideas do work as memes that can be broken off and reapplied to new situations that don't seem as clearly negative, as clearly tied to dehumanizing women or something like that. And this is where, one, incels are, their language is funny. The concept of an incel can be funny, and the word spread ironically. That's one way it spreads. Another way is incels deliberately weaponize memes and move across, they try to Trojan horse their ideas through filter bubbles by packaging them in more compelling frameworks like funny memes. You also see in the beauty space on TikTok, it's funny because the incels have this whole phrenological system of classification of beauty, and there's mewing as a concept of a jawline improvement technique, and canthal tilts, which is the angle of your eyes, and interocular distance, and these are all skull measuring things. But you'll see beauty influencers
getting a little Nazi-ish here.
Yeah, you're right. You see beauty influencers apply their makeup now using canthal tilt filters, or they'll talk about their jawline angle and interocular distance and hunter eyes versus prey eyes, and these are all ideas coming straight out of incel skull classifications. But it's because incels intentionally went over to Reddit forums like r/rate me, where women asked to be judged on their appearance, and then men would put in these ideas, and then they bring that over to TikTok, and then it gets popular. And then there's just also this boundary between what's real and what's fake, and that's kind of compelling to people. You're not sure whether people are actually saying this, so it's kind of funny. In the same way, we're not sure whether Gen Alpha is actually saying skibbity, so we popularized the word skibbity. I'm just going on a rant here. Feel free to stop me, but there's a lot going on, and it's a very nuanced picture.
And the word ultimately that makes it to all of the middle schoolers that you're interviewing is Sigma. What does Sigma mean?
In the incel hierarchy, there's a triangle of alphas on top. These are the chads. And there's betas who are alpha orbiters who are still able to get the leftovers of women that alphas leave over. And then at the bottom are incels who are unable to have sex. A sigma is an idealized man in the manosphere that's like similar to an alpha in social status, but chooses to do their own thing. At this point, I think middle schoolers use it interchangeably with the word alpha. It can just mean a strong, independent man. But that's kind of like where that word developed out of and then leaked into the mainstream.
Okay. So this is one of the examples for how words can make it from pretty fucked up environment into the mouths of middle schoolers. But it's not just words that are sort of being promoted or filtering through the internet. It's also styles of communication. And you talk about how increasingly the algorithms promote simplistic explanations, outrage, certain modes of communication, not just language. How does that work?
So one thing I talk about is the sensationalism that algorithms necessitate. The fact that if we're grabbing attention, which is what these platforms are incentivizing, we have to start with platforms want your attention. They want your eyeballs. So you start with that, and the logical conclusion is rage bait, clickbait, extremism. Extreme ideas are always going to go more viral than non-extreme ideas. I grew up in Albany's 20th congressional district. My congressman was Paul Tonko. He is boring. He never goes viral. Marjorie Taylor Greene and AOC have more extreme views. They're more likely to go viral. It's a bimodal distribution of like groups that go viral versus like you don't get represented like maybe more centrist ideas.
All right. Well, you took the lead in terms of transitioning us into politics, so I'm going to take the bait. I think that two things are true when it comes to how this all interacts with politics. First, as people say, Twitter is not real life. There are a lot of people who are not plugged into the world at all that you're talking about. Even as somebody who's decently online, a lot of the things that you talk about in this book, I'm like, wait, what the hell? But also, second, politics is in many ways a competition for attention, whether online or offline. And the ability to marshal that attention towards a person or set of ideas. And that process is increasingly happening within the social media structures that you're talking about. So you mentioned already that it's driving perhaps more extreme ways of communication or extreme ideas. How else is algo speak shaping our political behavior?
I mean, the filter bubble thing has been talked about to death. Here's an important thing to keep in mind as well about algorithms is that all words are metadata now. It used to be metadata was like hashtags, information about the content. Now algorithms analyze every word that's uploaded, every word that appears on screen through NLP, through computer vision. They can tell everything. And so the individual words become extremely important, and they all become pieces of information about categorizing people predictively into these clusters. You create like embeddings and numerical representations of who people are and what videos should be sent to which people. And so you tend to have maybe an exaggerated, because these are flattened representations of people online, you have an exaggerated, diluted version of reality present that people then perceive, and this does bleed into real reality. It does influence us offline. What's another thing that's interesting here is there's like cultural echo chambers that are inextricable from political echo chambers. Like the people who are getting the Hawk Tuah meme last summer are the people who ended up voting for Donald Trump, and the people who got the Brat memes are the people who ended up voting for Kamala Harris. So that's like, these are memes, these are ideas and words that spread separately from politics, but it's really not separate because it's just clusters of how algorithms assign people into groups.
Wait, hold on. You mean if you got served the Hawk Tuah meme, you voted for Donald Trump?
Not like 1-to-1, but there is a correlation there with the people who receive certain memes and people who vote certain ways. Like liberals are probably getting the performative matcha male manipulator stuff because that's a liberal in joke right now.
Wait. Hold right on. The liberal matcha male manipulator meme? Who's that?
There's a meme right now starting in New York City and going online about performative liberal men listening to Claro and reading Judith Butler or something. That's a meme that's
and
like
drinking matcha.
Yeah, right. And that's sort of that meme. You only really get it if you're in the progressive echo chambers and see why that's funny. And so there's like, yeah, but like it's not related directly to politics, but there's like groups that get assigned certain memes, and there's algorithms circularly reinforce these clusters as people engage with this kind of content.
Okay, so what's going viral on right-wing social media right now?
I'm not super on right-wing social media. It is hard to be tapped in, right? There's this discourse right now about, well, there's the obvious political stuff. I mean, we all like are aware of the Epstein discourse and the Twitter discourse, but what cultural memes are trending is like a different story. There's what music we're listening to. That's all like also algorithmically pushed. That's different.
We talked a little bit about going viral. Is the ability to go viral, but you also mentioned like Marjorie Taylor Greene and AOC. And when I think of successful politicians, at least electorally, obviously they won office, but I don't know that I would think of them as the most popular politicians in America. Is going viral synonymous with sort of being successful as a politician?
I do think it's important, like in the same sense that I think each medium affects how we communicate, each medium affects political success. It's thought of, the exact like statistics behind how much the 1960 debate affected things varies or whatever. But it's generally thought that a factor that helped Kennedy beat Nixon in 1960 is that Kennedy was more photogenic on TV. And it makes intuitive sense that more attractive candidates did better in the TV medium than non-attractive candidates. In the same way, I think the fact that algorithms are dominating our discourse right now means that more memeable candidates that have more viral potential. And this is something that, like, if we talk memetics, there is an idea of some memes perform better than other memes. And so these candidates that are better at being memeable are perhaps more successful in the algorithmic era.
What about Zoran Mamdani? What about his approach to campaigning made him so prone to going viral?
Yeah, he also had of good knowledge, clearly, of social media. He's very savvy with that stuff. But it's about how these ideas even spread, right? Let's think, like, why do people feel turned off by a lot of liberal ideas, by woke academia? It's because there's this feeling of exclusivity. It's this feeling of, like, if you're not with us, you're a Nazi. And I don't think Zoran ever gave that vibe. He gave this radically inclusive vibe that was the only people who were being excluded were the billionaires. And he was saying, all right, everybody wants $8, chicken. Everybody wants affordable housing. Let's make that happen. And it was this like radically inclusive message, I think, that doesn't feel like there's a cutoff to the meme. And memes spread through groups, right? That's how like these ideas diffuse. And there's a certain point sometimes where people encounter resistance unless it's Trojan horsed through with some other concept, like let's make it easier for there to be more halal carts, or let's make it like that's how you Trojan horse through democratic socialism. It's not like people feel a huge turnoff when you say the word socialism, but they do like the idea of cheaper chicken kebabs.
Are there predictable formulas for political virality? Because on one hand, it's like Zoran Mamdani being accessible is what helps his appeal across.
No, and here's
he
where
was
we
super
run into the
popular on
problem.
TikTok.
Formulas. And I know you're like, it's hard to approach this from a data science or quantitative perspective, because what we're talking about right now is vibes. A vibe is a person's like affect of a situation, our understanding of what's going on. The vibes are constantly changing. And this is also maybe a problem with like quantifying exactly, how much does TV affect things? How much does TikTok affect things? It's hard to put a number on people's feelings about things. And these are like embodied impressions we have of a situation. And the vibes for each campaign are going to be different. There's a different cultural context. There might be like a different issue the American people are facing. There might be, so like, if you want to be successful, you have to assess what the vibes are.
Yeah. You also talk about how people mistrust old forms of advertising, I guess particularly younger people. And so does that also mean that they sort of mistrust old forms of political campaigning?
I think so. I think it's, for a meme to spread, it has to be packaged in a compelling medium. It has to be turned into something. So I make educational content online, right? And this has always been a thing that you need attention to teach people. A teacher needs attention of their students to get a concept across. Otherwise, the concept won't, but a classroom, like the package is like different. Online, I have to do everything as more overt edutainment. Even though I'm trying to spread an educational message, I very deliberately have to package it as something funny, as something entertaining, because that's how you get an idea through, like the idea of the Trojan horse, which again, we're using metaphors here. Metaphors are never correct, but it's, if you wrap something up in an idea inside some other idea, it can push further. And the same is true of politics and advertising here. You asked about advertising. Why doesn't like a straight advertisement for a Coca-Cola can in the past on TV didn't do as well as like showing a family connecting over Coca-Cola, because you connect more to the family because it's the package for the advertisement is, oh, this human connectiveness, which makes you feel better. Now we're a little more skeptical of that form of advertising. Things need to be packaged as like a get ready with me brand deals, but it's still like a new medium in which we hold the idea. And the same is true of political messaging right now.
And how does that end up manifesting in the political space?
It means that you have politics packaged within culture. And that's what you get with these far right podcasts. People keep talking about, where's the Joe Rogan, Theo Vaughn of the left? It's packaging politics inside culture. And the culture of the left was this idea of exclusivity, of like, you're either with us or you're a Nazi, right? And I think it was built on good ideas. The ideas of woke academia were like, let's make people feel like more included. Paradoxically, they pushed that framework in a way that made people feel excluded, and it felt there was a cutoff. Every person has like a decision point when they encounter a meme, like, do I want to accept this? And their boundary is lower when it's in that wrapped up in that package of something cool. And Joe Rogan is cool. He's talking about other things too. He's not just talking about politics. He's talking about psychedelics. He's talking about exploring interesting theories of consciousness. You might just watch him for that, but inside there's like a seed of these ideas it's being pushed through.
There's also the version of AOC playing video games on Twitch and sort of talking about politics while doing that. Does that work? I mean, I'm not online in these spaces, so I don't know, like, when AOC is sort of getting ready and putting on makeup while talking about, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or talking about, Medicare for All while playing Twitch. There's probably a certain take on that, which is like, oh, this is cringe. There's another take on it, which is like, oh, this is relatable.
Well, okay. The big buzzword in the influencer and the creator economy is authenticity. Authenticity is a package here. If you talk about Medicare while you're like playing Twitch, it's easier to spread your message than if you just talk about Medicare. And that's the package. It's something that holds something else. And it's a more compelling way to funnel through this idea to people who also, like, they feel immediate resistance to being advertised to. We all have felt that on some level throughout history. And now there's just more awareness of when we're being advertised to. And we feel when someone is relatable, when we feel like it's genuinely coming from a human who's not trying to push us anything, but just wants to play some games on Twitch, that feels more relatable, something you're more willing to pay attention to and pick up on these cues.
Let's talk a little bit more overtly about the linguistics of politics. You mentioned that the left found itself in a place where it was using language to distinguish the barriers of their in-group, right? Whether, it's little things, even like saying, oh, we need to center this or center that, is something that the progressive side of the Democratic Party says all the time, or pronouns or whatever it may be. So maybe that can cause challenges because you're not using broad appeal, generous language that brings everybody in. At the same time, part of politics is letting people know that you're on their side or whatnot.
Right.
And so
and that's how we get dog whistles and
in-group language. So I guess how do politicians manage that? Be generous with language and bring people in. But at the same time, they're like using different accents and sort of particular ways of speech to appeal to smaller groups.
Right. In the same way that I'll speak in a different accent when I'm making a social media video, a TV broadcaster will speak in a different accent when they're appearing on TV. We all constantly switch our accents for different mediums. Again, it's a question of how we act in mediums. Yeah, a politician in South Carolina, they tend to take on more southern sounding accents than when they're talking in New York. And that's not a coincidence. That's because they're, again, I don't want to overuse the word packaging, but it's sort of like a font, like Times New Roman. If I write a book in Times New Roman, you take it more seriously than if I write it in Comic Sans, even if it's the exact same idea. It's just because you have a vibe, an affectation, an understanding of how this mode of presentation feels relatable or not relatable. And yeah, so I think dog whistles are a big part of this, not even in the negative sense. It's just like you want to use language that feels inclusive to everybody, but at the same time has those like kind of hints for your real base to pick up on. I think Zoran did that really well, for example. Like he used this language which felt welcoming to everybody, but you could still tell he was a socialist.
I was what I've talked about this, I think, on a podcast a long time ago, but I was asking a friend who's a linguist, why is it the case that particularly when I drink alcohol, I like start to mimic the accent of the person that I'm speaking with? It seems kind of poserish. And he was like, no, no, it's actually generosity, right? Like you want to make the person that you're talking to feel like you're relatable to them. And that in mimicking other people's accents, you're sort of like, and this person was British. So in particular, he was saying like you can move up the socioeconomic scale or down the socioeconomic scale based on the accent that you use. And when you're talking to like
Right.
somebody of a lower economic status, you want to move your accent down the scale. And when you're talking to somebody with a higher socioeconomic status, you want to move your accent up the scale. Is that generosity, though, or is that poser behavior?
No, I mean, code switching is completely normal. You're going to talk differently to your grandma than you do to your friends. That's not you being inauthentic. There's no such thing as an authentic self. I think everybody should read Irving Goffman's Presentation of the Self in Everyday Life. This is a great book. But the idea is we're like constantly performing for a perceived audience, and that audience is going to be different in different circumstances. On the algorithm, we have to perform for our imaginary audience in the same way a TV broadcaster has to perform for their imaginary audience. But we also have to perform for the algorithm itself, because otherwise the video is not going to be pushed. So there's a few layers of performativity there. Code switching is a natural thing. And here's the thing about alcohol and why you feel like you're performing more. It's a question of vibe again. It's the alcohol lowers that social barrier. It amplifies, and kind of like algorithms amplify human behavior, alcohol does in another way.
Oftentimes, also, politicians can change the way that we feel about an idea based on how they talk about it. Like the most common example, I think, in politics is the estate tax versus the death tax, right?
Obamacare versus the Affordable Care Act, and there's a huge difference in which one people support. Yeah, totally. Pro-rights versus like pro-abortion versus pro-life. Yeah, that kind of stuff.
Does that sort of, I guess, like, is that effective? And what are some like examples that we're using today?
Absolutely. The fact that these words have different feelings. Linguistically, there should be no major difference between you saying you're pro-life and between saying you're pro-abortion. But really, we have a huge kind of recoil when we hear abortion. In the same way, middle schoolers have a recoil when they hear the word suicide, and they use the word unalive as a genuine euphemism because it sounds less scary. I think there's a lot of that happening with political speech as well. Look at the way like a lot of the discourse is happening around like Palestine. Fascinated with Palestinian algo speak, like the watermelon emoji instead of the Palestinian flag, or IOF instead of IDF. And this is one, it's to circumvent the algorithm. Two, it's to signal to your in-group that you're part of this in-group. Three, it's reframing kind of this struggle because it's awareness of the algorithmic performativity. It's saying, hey, by the way, I'm saying this because the algorithm won't let me say IDF or the Palestinian flag without my video getting suppressed. So there's like a meta signal happening when you say that implicitly. And there's a really interesting kind of dynamic of communication happening there.
Okay. So wrapping up here, I'm getting ready to run for office in 2026 or 2023. I'm not actually, but say that I am. What is your advice to me in terms of how to marshal attention through, I don't know, the language that I use and my style of communication on the internet?
I mean, unfortunately, extremism does work because the way the algorithms push certain things, you have to think about context and how context collapse occurs on social media. When a video is sent out, it's going to be viewed by an audience you don't expect. That means you need to be able to package this in a way where the algorithm will only continue recommending things because it reevaluates the demographics of like who watches a video, and that's how it decides whether to send it further. So it continuously reevaluates whether to send videos further. You need to be prepared for unexpected audiences to come across that video.
All right. Well, good advice. We're going to leave it there for today. Thank you so much, Adam, for joining me.
Thank you for having me.